The cruelest betrayals are never shouted across a room. They arrive quietly, in the glow of a phone screen at midnight. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering windows of Soraya Vale's Boston brownstone, turning Beacon Hill into a watercolor of gold streetlights and white silence, while the grandfather clock near the marble fireplace whispered 12:14 in slow-measured ticks, and inside the warmth of the kitchen everything looked untouched by disaster. The rosemary butter candles flickered beside a cooling sea-based dinner. Jazz hummed low through hidden speakers, and the crystal glasses she had set for her anniversary dinner reflected tiny stars across the dark granite island where she stood barefoot in a silk espresso-colored robe, waiting for her billionaire husband to come home. Then her phone vibrated. One sound, small enough to miss, heavy enough to change a life. Soraya glanced down absent-mindedly, expecting another delayed flight update from Callum Vane, the fintech king America loved to photograph beside magazine headlines about modern wealth and black excellence and billion-dollar innovation. But instead, she saw a notification from Blackstone Private Banking. Transfer complete. $47,820. Recipient, Brielle Knox Properties. Her fingers stopped moving around the stem of her wine glass. For a long moment, she didn't breathe at all. Outside, snow slid silently down the townhouse windows while the city continued unaware that somewhere inside one marriage, something sacred had just cracked open. She opened the transaction details slowly, with the kind of calm people mistake for weakness, and there it was waiting for her in cold digital precision. Monthly penthouse rent in Seaport District, luxury furnishing installments, concierge membership renewal, champagne subscription service, all tied to the same recipient name, Brielle Knox. The name itself meant nothing yet, but the pattern did. Women always sensed the truth long before the evidence arrived. Soraya lowered herself carefully onto the leather stool beside the kitchen island, the candlelight tracing soft bronze against her deep brown skin while the Boston skyline shimmered behind her. Like a kingdom she had once helped build with her own bare hands. 10 years ago, Callum Vane had been sleeping in a 600-square-foot apartment over a laundromat in Dorchester with nothing except coding talent, impossible ambition, and overdue student loans. People called him self-made now. They never mentioned her. They never mentioned the inheritance from her grandmother's Charleston property that funded his first servers, or the nights she worked double shifts in corporate accounting while he pitched investors who barely looked her in the eye. History had rewritten her into a supporting character inside her own marriage. Another vibration interrupted the silence. A message from Callum finally appeared. "Running late, sweetheart. Don't wait up." Soraya stared at those 4 words until they blurred beneath the reflection of chandelier light. Sweetheart. The tenderness of the word almost made her smile. Almost. Somewhere across the city, her husband was paying another woman's rent using money connected to the account carrying both their names, and somehow he still believed she would remain invisible inside the equation. The jazz record ended. Silence filled the room like water. Slowly, Soraya reached for the untouched anniversary cake sitting beneath its glass dome, her fingertips brushing the silver knife beside it before she closed the lid again without cutting a single slice. Sometimes dignity begins in the smallest decisions. She rose gracefully, carried her wine to the window overlooking the Charles River, and watched the snowfall thicken over Boston's sleeping rooftops while the phone screen continued glowing softly in her hand like evidence delivered straight from God. And maybe tonight, wherever you're listening from, maybe your room is quiet too. Maybe it's past midnight where you are. Maybe life has disappointed you in ways nobody else can see yet. So if this story finds your heart somehow, tell me below where you're listening from and what time it is in your world tonight. Because some stories are not just entertainment, they are company for people carrying silent storms. The house remained silent long after the snowstorm swallowed the last sounds of the city, but Soraya Vale did not sleep. At 3:17 in the morning, she sat alone inside Callum's glass-walled home office overlooking the frozen Charles River, wrapped in one of his oversized charcoal cashmere sweaters, while the glow from dual computer monitors painted silver light across her face. Most wives would have searched for photographs first, or messages, or lipstick stains hidden beneath expensive lies. Soraya searched spreadsheets, because long before she became Mrs. Callum Vane, she had been the woman who understood numbers better than emotions, patterns better than promises. And tonight the numbers were speaking very clearly. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as she accessed the joint portfolio dashboard tied to Vane Capital Holdings, the same financial architecture she had quietly helped design years before reporters started calling her husband a genius. Transaction after transaction unfolded before her eyes with brutal elegance. Private dining reservations in Miami, a Cartier bracelet purchased in Soho 3 weeks earlier, recurring payments to a waterfront penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, all routed carefully through layered expense channels intended to look invisible. But betrayal always leaves fingerprints somewhere, especially when men grow arrogant inside luxury. Soraya leaned back slowly in Callum's leather chair and stared toward the city lights trembling through snowfall beyond the windows. Her reflection hovered faintly against the glass, poised, composed, beautiful in that restrained way powerful women often become after years of teaching themselves how not to ask for too much. She remembered another winter night almost 11 years earlier, when Callum sat beside her at a tiny diner near Northeastern University, wearing a borrowed wool coat and apologizing because he could only afford one coffee for both of them. Back then his ambition had felt romantic, honest. He used to sketch business ideas onto napkins while she balanced corporate accounting textbooks across her lap, and every dream he built somehow included the words us. Us against the world. Us building something bigger. Us never forgetting where we started. The memory tightened quietly inside her chest. Not because she missed the man he used to be, but because she finally understood how long she had been grieving him while he still stood beside her every day. A soft notification chimed again from her laptop. New transaction pending approval. Brielle Knox Interior Design Services. $8,200. Soraya stared at the amount without expression before opening the attached invoice. White boucle furniture. Imported Italian lighting fixtures. Custom marble vanity installation. Another woman was decorating a life financed by the marriage Soraya had spent a decade protecting. Somewhere downstairs the front door finally opened. Callum had come home. She heard the distant sound of polished shoes crossing marble floors and the familiar pause near the kitchen where he would eventually notice the untouched anniversary dinner still sitting beneath candlelight. For a brief second, she closed her eyes. Not out of heartbreak, out of clarity. When she opened them again, the woman staring back from the office window looked different somehow. Colder, sharper, like steel hidden beneath velvet. Callum's footsteps moved closer down the hallway before stopping outside the office door. He hesitated there, probably surprised to see light beneath the frame at nearly 4 in the morning. Then came his gentle knock. "Baby," he asked softly, "why are you awake?" Soraya glanced once more at the glowing screen filled with secrets purchased using her loyalty, then calmly reached for the wireless mouse and clicked one small option hidden deep inside the marital asset management system she herself had created years ago. Account review status. Pending restriction authorization. Her manicured finger hovered above the confirmation button while her husband waited unknowingly outside the door, still believing this marriage belonged entirely to him. Callum pushed the office door open slowly with the careful caution of a man who sensed tension but still believed charm could soften it, and the warm scent of cedar from his winter coat drifted into the room as Soraya remained seated behind the glowing monitors without turning around. Snow clung to the shoulders of his navy overcoat, while melted flakes darkened the hardwood beneath his polished shoes, and for one suspended moment the scene almost resembled every other late night they had survived together during the climb toward wealth. Except tonight the silence between them felt too clean, too sharp, like glass waiting to break. "You stayed up for me," he said quietly, loosening his scarf while offering the same tired smile that once used to undo her completely. Soraya finally lifted her eyes toward his reflection in the office window, instead of facing him directly. "I stayed up for the truth." The words landed softly. That was what unsettled him most. Not anger, not tears. Precision. Callum's expression flickered almost invisibly before smoothing itself back into practiced calm. He stepped farther into the office, expensive watch catching silver light from the desk lamp. "Baby, whatever this is, let us not do this at 4 in the morning." Soraya studied him carefully then. The billionaire America admired for his discipline, his intelligence, his interviews about loyalty and legacy and family values. He still looked beautiful in the dangerous way successful men often do after years of being rewarded for every selfish instinct they never learned to control. Do what exactly? She asked. Discuss why our joint account is furnishing another woman's penthouse. The room went still. Truly still. Even the radiator hiss near the windows seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those words. Callum stopped moving entirely. For the first time since walking through the door, real uncertainty crossed his face. Not guilt yet, just calculation. He glanced briefly toward the monitor screens glowing on the desk, understanding immediately that this conversation was already far beyond denial. Soraya, he started carefully. It is not what you think. A quiet breath escaped her nose. Not laughter. Something colder. Interesting, she murmured. Because I think exactly what the invoices say. Callum rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw before stepping closer. Brielle is connected to a development project in Seaport. I helped her temporarily. That is all. Temporarily. The word floated through the room like perfume covering decay. Soraya leaned back in the leather chair and folded her hands gracefully in her lap. Every movement controlled enough to make him uneasy. You paid $47,000 for temporary? She asked softly. That must be a very demanding business arrangement. His jaw tightened. I was going to explain. When? She replied immediately. Before or after you finished decorating her marble bathroom? The directness of the question sliced through the remaining warmth in his expression. Callum turned away briefly, exhaling toward the dark window while snow continued falling over Boston in thick white waves. He looked tired suddenly. Older, but not remorseful enough. That was what Soraya noticed most. You are overreacting, he said at last, lowering his voice into the patient tone powerful men use when they expect women to emotionally collapse beneath pressure. This does not have to become something destructive. Soraya stared at him for several seconds without blinking. Then slowly, elegantly, she reached toward the wireless mouse resting beside her laptop. Too late, she said. And with one calm click echoing softly through the office, the marital asset restriction officially activated across every shared financial account tied to Callum Vane's empire. The sound itself was almost delicate. One soft click beneath Soraya's fingertips. Yet somewhere across Boston, an empire immediately began choking on its own excess. Callum's phone vibrated before either of them spoke again. Then vibrated a second time. And a third. The sharp bursts of sound sliced through the office, while his expression slowly transformed from irritation into disbelief. He pulled the device from his coat pocket and glanced down at the screen, confusion darkening his features. What the hell? Another notification appeared instantly. Payment declined. International wire transfer on hold. Account access restricted pending CO owner review. Soraya watched him quietly from behind the desk, her face unreadable in the silver-blue glow of the monitors while snow continued falling beyond the windows like the city itself was trying to bury what this marriage had become. Callum swiped through the alerts rapidly now, his movements sharper with every second. You froze the accounts, he demanded, finally looking at her directly. Not loudly. Worse. Controlled anger. The kind, powerful men reserve for moments when they realize control is slipping away from them publicly. Soraya tilted her head slightly. No, she replied with elegant calm. I protected my assets. His jaw tightened hard enough for the muscle to twitch beneath his skin. Your assets? He gave a disbelieving laugh under his breath and stepped closer to the desk. Everything connected to those accounts belongs to Vane Capital. Incorrect, she answered immediately. Legally and financially incorrect. The words landed like ice water. Callum stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Somewhere during the climb toward billions, he had forgotten something dangerously important about his wife. Soraya never spoke unless she already knew she was right. Another call came through, this time from the chief financial officer. Callum ignored it. Then another from private banking. Then another from his executive assistant. The silence inside the office became unbearable beneath the weight of incoming disaster. Do you have any idea what this could trigger by morning? He asked. Payroll transfers. Investor confidence. International settlements. Soraya folded one leg slowly over the other beneath the desk, graceful as a queen listening to a servant panic. You should have thought about that before financing another woman with marital funds. It was temporary support, he snapped. Stop calling it an affair. For the first time all night, emotion flickered faintly across Soraya's face. Not heartbreak, disappointment, deep and exhausted. You know what is fascinating, Callum? She said softly. Men always become accountants once betrayal gets expensive. The truth of it cut deeper than yelling ever could. Callum dragged one hand down his face before pacing toward the office windows overlooking the river. Below them, Boston slept peacefully. Beneath fresh snow, while inside the glass mansion, two people stood at the edge of something irreversible. You are making this personal, he muttered. Soraya's eyes hardened almost invisibly. It became personal when you used my loyalty like a corporate expense account. His phone rang again. This time he answered sharply. What? A tense voice spilled through the speaker loud enough for Soraya to hear fragments. Wire failures. Restricted authorization. Board confusion. Morning concerns. Callum closed his eyes briefly as pressure finally began gathering around him from every direction at once. When the call ended, he remained facing the window for several long seconds before speaking quietly. Reverse it before sunrise. Soraya rose from the leather chair at last, smoothing the sleeves of his cashmere sweater over her wrists as she walked toward him with terrifying composure. She stopped beside him near the glass overlooking the sleeping city. No, she whispered. Tonight is the first honest thing this marriage has seen in years. By 6:30 that morning the snowfall had stopped, but the damage spreading through Callum Vane's empire moved faster than the storm ever could. The first cracks appeared quietly inside the private terminal at Logan International Airport, where Callum stood in a charcoal overcoat beside two impatient investors preparing to board a Gulfstream flight to Manhattan. The polished marble lounge smelled faintly of espresso and cedar, while muted financial news played across mounted televisions overhead, and for a brief moment everything still looked normal from the outside. Wealth always looked beautiful before collapse. Then the concierge approached him carefully with an expression trained people in luxury hospitality only wore around billionaires during uncomfortable situations. Mr. Vane, she said softly, there appears to be an issue processing the aircraft authorization payment. Callum's face darkened immediately. Run it again. She swallowed subtly. We already did, sir. Behind him one investor shifted awkwardly, while another pretended not to notice. Small humiliations always arrive first. Quiet ones. Callum pulled out his black titanium card himself this time, irritation tightening every movement. The terminal scanner blinked once. Then again. Declined. The word glowed coldly across the screen like public judgment. For the first time in years, silence formed around him not out of admiration, but discomfort. Somewhere 60 miles away inside the Beacon Hill townhouse, Soraya sat alone in the breakfast room wearing a cream cashmere set, while early winter sunlight spilled across the marble floors and illuminated the untouched wedding photograph resting beside her coffee cup. The woman inside the frame looked younger, softer, still convinced loyalty alone could protect love from power. Her phone buzzed steadily across the table all morning with notifications from attorneys, financial institutions, and automated alerts confirming the full enforcement of the marital protection clause she had personally insisted upon years earlier when Vane Capital first crossed its $100 million valuation. Back then Callum laughed and called her paranoid. Nobody plans for betrayal before success. He had teased while kissing her forehead over late-night contracts. But Soraya had grown up watching powerful women disappear financially inside marriage. Her grandmother used to say, never build a kingdom where your name is only decoration. So she made sure the paperwork remembered her even after her husband forgot to. Across Boston, panic now moved through Vane Capital headquarters in sharp designer heels and hushed conference calls. Payroll transfers stalled. 2 international acquisitions froze pending authorization review. The board demanded explanations before markets opened. Worse than the financial disruption itself was the rumor beginning to spread quietly among executive circles that Callum Vane no longer controlled his own empire completely. Men like him survived on perception almost as much as money. At 9:12 that morning, another message appeared on Soraya's phone from an unknown number. She opened it calmly. You are humiliating him publicly. No greeting. No signature necessary. Brielle. Soraya stared at the message while steam curled slowly from her untouched coffee. Then, another text arrived seconds later. I did not know he was using shared money. That one almost amused her. Mistresses always discovered morality once luxury became unstable. Soraya placed the phone face down without replying and turned instead toward the snow-covered courtyard beyond the windows, where workers carefully salted the stone pathway leading toward the street. Everything outside looked clean, white, untouched. Yet beneath the snow, winter had already hardened the ground completely. At exactly 10:03, her assistant called from downtown. "Mrs. Vale," the young woman said nervously, "C&B Financial wants to know if you will attend the emergency board meeting this afternoon." Soraya lifted her coffee slowly to her lips, her reflection steady in the window glass. "No," she answered softly. "Let them feel his decisions without me protecting him for once." The emergency board meeting began at 4 o'clock sharp on the 39th floor of Vane Capital's headquarters, but by then the atmosphere inside the glass conference room already felt poisoned by fear. Snow clouds hung low over downtown Boston, while the city below disappeared beneath cold gray fog. And around the 12-foot walnut table, some of the most powerful financial minds on the East Coast sat in tailored suits pretending not to panic. Nobody mentioned Soraya directly at first. That was the interesting thing about wealthy people. They always circled the truth before touching it. Callum stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows with his sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists, tie loosened for the first time in years during a board session, while legal teams projected frozen transaction reports onto the massive digital screen behind him. Red warning notifications covered the presentation like blood beneath ice. Delayed acquisitions, restricted liquidity movement, suspended investor clearances pending marital authorization review. Every problem inside the room traced back to the same woman who was not physically present, yet somehow controlled the emotional temperature of the entire building. "We need this resolved before Asian markets react," one board member said sharply. "If word spreads that internal financial authority is compromised, the valuation damage alone could cost us hundreds of millions." Callum remained silent for several seconds before finally speaking in a voice so calm it almost sounded dangerous. "It will be handled privately." Another executive leaned forward. "With respect, Callum, it stopped being private the moment payroll transfers froze." The humiliation in his eyes darkened instantly, not because they questioned his leadership, but because they were forcing him to confront something he had spent years refusing to acknowledge. Soraya was not emotionally attached to the empire. She was structurally attached to it. And structures do not disappear simply because a husband grows careless. Meanwhile, across the city, Soraya stood alone inside the Boston Museum of Fine Arts wearing a long camel wool coat, while soft classical music drifted through the nearly empty galleries. She moved slowly past enormous oil paintings beneath warm golden lighting, one hand resting lightly against the leather strap of her handbag, while her phone remained untouched inside her pocket despite the relentless stream of incoming calls. The museum had always calmed her. Beauty arranged carefully against silence. No lies there. She paused before a painting of a woman standing alone on a storm-dark shoreline, her expression composed despite the crashing waves behind her, and something about it felt painfully familiar. "Mrs. Vale?" a gentle voice asked behind her. Soraya turned to find an older curator smiling politely. "Your husband donated the West Wing renovation last spring. We never thank you personally for supporting it." Her gaze lingered briefly on the artwork before answering softly. "You should thank the woman who balanced the numbers while he collected the applause." The curator looked confused, but Soraya simply smiled with quiet grace and continued walking. By evening, financial blogs had begun whispering carefully coded headlines across Wall Street circles. Questions about governance, speculation regarding executive instability, rumors of internal marital conflict affecting Vane Capital operations. Nothing explicit, yet devastating all the same. Because in finance, perception collapses long before money does. At 7:23 that night, Callum finally arrived back at the townhouse, exhausted and hollow-eyed from 12 straight hours of damage control. He loosened his coat slowly inside the foyer while the house greeted him with unbearable silence. No music, no dinner waiting beneath candlelight, no soft footsteps crossing marble floors toward him anymore. Then he noticed something sitting carefully atop the entryway console table beneath the chandelier glow. His wedding ring, resting beside a printed copy of the Brielle Knox payment invoices tied together with a black silk ribbon. No note attached. None was necessary. Callum stared at the ring for a long time without touching it, while somewhere upstairs a bedroom door closed softly, and for the first time since becoming a billionaire, he understood what it felt like to stand outside the warmth of his own life. 3 weeks later, Boston no longer whispered about the situation inside Vane Capital. It analyzed it. Financial podcasts debated governance risks over morning espresso. Society blogs dissected photographs of Callum attending charity functions alone. Even the silence surrounding Soraya had become its own form of power because people feared women they could not publicly unravel. And through all of it, she remained almost impossible to reach. The townhouse on Beacon Hill had been sold quietly through a private luxury broker before Christmas. No public listing. No dramatic headlines. One day the lights simply stopped turning on at night. By January, Soraya Vale was living nearly 3,000 miles away beneath the golden winter sunlight of Santa Barbara, California, inside a restored Spanish-style estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean where salt air drifted through arched windows and bougainvillea climbed ivory stone walls like soft purple fire. The house felt nothing like Boston. That was intentional. Boston had carried too many echoes of who she used to be. Here, mornings began with ocean fog and the distant sound of waves touching shore instead of investment calls vibrating through glass hallways. Here, nobody introduced her as someone's wife first. At 9 each morning, she walked barefoot across warm limestone floors into the converted library she now used as headquarters for Vale Meridian Capital, a private investment network funding women of color entrepreneurs overlooked by traditional financial institutions. The idea had existed quietly in her notebooks for years while she stood behind Callum's spotlight helping build his dreams instead of her own. Pain had simply forced her to stop postponing herself. Mrs. Vale, the Chicago founders are waiting on Zoom. Her assistant called softly one morning as sunlight spilled across polished oak shelves lined with finance books and framed photographs of Black women entrepreneurs from every decade before her. Soraya adjusted the cuff of her ivory silk blouse and glanced briefly toward the ocean outside before taking her seat at the long walnut conference table. Come looked beautiful on her now, stronger than happiness ever had. Send them through, she answered. The screen filled with nervous young founders pitching sustainable tech platforms, healthcare startups, educational software designed for underserved communities, and for the first time in years Soraya felt something inside her chest return that betrayal had almost stolen completely. Purpose untouched by someone else's approval. Meanwhile, across the country, Callum's world continued shrinking despite the billions still attached to his name. Brielle Knox disappeared from public view almost immediately after the financial restrictions became national gossip inside elite circles. Her luxury penthouse lease quietly terminated. Her social media accounts vanished one by one. Even the designer boutiques that once welcomed her with champagne suddenly remembered she was no longer attached to stable power. Women like Brielle survived on reflected light. The moment the source flickered, darkness arrived fast. Callum learned that lesson too late. On a cold February evening in Manhattan, he sat alone inside a private suite at the Lowell Hotel while city lights blurred beyond rain-covered windows and untouched whiskey rested beside stacks of legal documents spread across the dining table. Every room still looked expensive, yet nothing felt warm anymore. Success had become strangely quiet without someone beside him who genuinely loved the man underneath the ambition. His phone buzzed softly against the marble counter. A Forbes article notification appeared across the screen. He opened it instinctively. Soraya Vale redefines private equity for the next generation of women founders. Beneath the headline was a photograph taken earlier that week in California. Soraya stood near the ocean wearing a cream-tailored coat with gold sunlight touching her dark skin while confidence settled around her like royalty instead of performance. She looked untouchable, peaceful, like someone who no longer waited to be chosen. Callum stared at the image for a very long time before slowly lowering the phone into his lap, and somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion and ego and humiliation, regret finally stopped sounding like inconvenience and started sounding like grief. By late spring, the Pacific coast carried the kind of golden warmth that made people believe healing could happen quietly, And on a Saturday evening in Monterey, the annual Ocean Crest Philanthropy Summit unfolded beneath strings of soft amber lights overlooking crashing waves 70 feet below the cliffside terrace. Billionaires, senators, venture capitalists, and media executives drifted through the luxury resort ballroom, holding crystal champagne flutes, while a live jazz quartet played near towering windows facing the ocean sunset. But despite the wealth gathered inside the room, there was only one person everyone seemed determined to photograph that night. Soraya Vale. She stood near the center of the terrace in an elegant ivory gown with long sleeves flowing softly against the coastal wind, her dark curls pinned low against her neck, while diamond earrings caught fading sunlight every time she turned her head to speak. Calm radiated from her now in a way money could never purchase. Not performance. Not revenge. Peace earned painfully. Ms. Vale, Forbes would love 5 minutes before your panel, a young publicist asked carefully beside her. Soraya smiled politely. After the foundation announcement, her voice remained warm, but measured. She had learned the difference between accessibility and availability. Across the ballroom entrance, Callum Vane stopped walking the moment he saw her. The noise around him blurred instantly beneath the weight of recognition. For nearly 6 months, he had watched her transformation through articles, interviews, investment reports, and whispered admiration from people who once only acknowledged her as his wife. But none of it prepared him for seeing her in person again. Soraya no longer looked like someone standing beside power. She looked like power itself. He remained near the glass doors longer than necessary, one hand tightening subtly around the champagne he had not tasted all evening, while executives greeted him cautiously in passing. His company had stabilized publicly after months of restructuring and damage control, but the confidence he once carried so effortlessly never fully returned. Lost change posture. Even expensive suits could not hide it completely. Then Soraya laughed softly at something an investor beside her said, and the sound crossed the terrace like memory. Callum lowered his eyes briefly. 10 years together, and somehow he had forgotten the exact shape of her happiness until another room reflected it back at him, without his presence attached. A moderator soon called Soraya toward the stage where ocean blue lighting illuminated the charity platform overlooking the water. Applause filled the ballroom as she stepped gracefully toward the microphone. Tonight, she began, her voice steady and rich beneath the California night sky. We are launching $20 million in funding dedicated to women founders historically denied access to capital, not because they lack talent, but because nobody powerful bothered to see them fully. The audience erupted again. Callum felt something inside his chest tighten painfully because he suddenly understood the cruelest part of all this. Soraya had always been extraordinary. He had simply benefited from her brilliance so long that he eventually mistook it for background noise. After the presentation ended, guests crowded around her immediately while cameras flashed across the terrace in soft bursts of light. Callum remained standing alone near the ballroom windows watching her from a distance he himself had created, and for the first time in his life billions of dollars felt completely useless against the simple, impossible truth settling quietly over him beneath the California stars. The woman he once believed would never leave had finally learned how beautiful life could become without waiting for him to value her. The crowd slowly dissolved into the velvet California night as servers cleared champagne glasses and the last notes of jazz drifted across the ocean terrace beneath a sky filled with stars. But Callum remained standing near the balcony doors, unable to move past the weight of everything he had finally learned too late. Soraya stood alone now at the far end of the terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean, her ivory gown moving softly in the coastal wind while moonlight painted silver across the water below. For a moment she looked almost untouchable, not because she had become cold, but because she had finally become whole without needing anyone's permission. Callum crossed the terrace slowly until he stopped beside her, careful not to stand too close. The scent of salt air and jasmine lingered between them while waves crashed gently against the cliffs beneath the resort. "You were right," he said quietly, his voice rougher than she remembered. Soraya kept her eyes on the horizon. "About what?" He lowered his gaze briefly toward the champagne glass in his hand before answering. "About all of it." Silence settled around them again, but this time it no longer felt sharp. "Just honest. I kept thinking the money was the damage," he admitted softly. "The accounts. The company. The headlines. Soraya turned toward him then, her expression calm beneath the pale moonlight. No, Callum, she said. The damage happened long before the transactions. The truth of it hollowed something inside him completely. He looked at her, as if searching for the woman who once waited up through sleepless nights, helping him build impossible dreams from almost nothing. But that version of Soraya no longer existed here beside the ocean. She had buried her inside survival and rebuilt someone stronger from the ashes. I loved you, he whispered. Her eyes softened slightly. Not with romance. With grief for what could have been. I know, she answered gently. But eventually, I had to love myself more. A distant wave crashed against the cliffs below as Soraya reached for the untouched champagne, resting beside the railing, and quietly set it down without taking a sip. Then, with one final graceful glance toward the ocean horizon glowing beneath the California moon, she turned and walked back toward the warm, golden lights of the ballroom, without looking behind her once, leaving Callum alone beside the sea with the unbearable understanding that some women do not destroy your life when they leave. They simply stop carrying it for you.